Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning again, and welcome to Be Your Own Spielberg, using storytelling techniques to create highly engaging and impactful presentations with Brian Klaas. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. Got a few housekeeping items to share. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat section, and I'll do my best to be helpful. If you have questions for Brian as we go, if you could please put those in the Q&A, that will help us not lose them as we use the chat for some other kinds of interaction. So if the question's important, put it in that Q&A. If captions would be helpful for you, use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen and choose Live Transcript. AI note takers are not allowed in our trainings and will be removed from the webinar. And certificates of attendance will be sent via email to those who attend the full session. And now I'm going to turn things over to Brian Klaas, who is the director at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health Center for Teaching and Learning.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really happy to be here. I have had the pleasure of presenting a number of times to the GLPTTC, right? GLPTTC. And it's been great, and the audiences have been great, and I love talking about presentations. I teach about this at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm a faculty member there. I teach 5 different classes, and I've been teaching for a very long time about storytelling and storytelling in the health sciences and within substance misuse prevention, public health in general. I love talking about stories and how we can become better storytellers. And there's a lot of good reasons for this, and I'll get to all of them. And if you have questions or comments, like Rebecca said, please put them in the Q&A. I'm also going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have responses, you can put them in the chat. I'm going to ask you questions throughout today's session. We'll do some exercises, more formal ones and less formal ones. And you can put your responses to those exercises in the chat, and I'll do my best to keep on top of it. And it's great to see so many people from all over the US here. And I'm just going to dive right in. Talk about storytelling. Let's get going. All right. So we live in an attention economy, multiple modes of input, competing sources of information, different stimulus, desire, biochemical responses are competing for our attention at any given time. Right now, I am competing with email or Teams or Zoom messages or your lunch or coffee break or information pouring in on your phones and or laptops. And we're being conditioned, whether we acknowledge it or not, to spend less time holding focus on a single task and more time going from one quick casual reward to another. This is why games like Fortnite and Wordle are still so popular. They are definitely popular. Even though my sort of older teenage sons tell me that Fortnite's dead, I assure you it's not. You pick them up, you play them for a few minutes, you put them down, and then walk away, feeling splendid, if that's the row in Wordle that you get to, as I usually do as well. Even an average game of Fortnite these days is less than 20 minutes. And when it comes to reading in particular, we now live in a too long didn't read culture, right? If people bother to read anything at all. We want things summarized for us, right? We don't want to have to read whole journal articles or whole long blog posts or something like that. And we're actually training our brains to skip sentences as we read. Cory Doctorow is a researcher and faculty member at Harvard. He's done a number of studies on this. And what we found that in digital environments particularly, so like you're reading a PDF, you're reading an article in the Chicago Tribune or a blog post somewhere. What we learn to do over time is that we are reading the first sentence, maybe the second sentence of a paragraph, because that's where the key ideas are. And then we're skipping everything else because those third, fourth, fifth sentences are simply supplementary to the key idea or the main idea presented in that first paragraph. So, people talk about articles or resources. They're like, they're good, but long, right? As if the two are somehow mutually exclusive. We want information faster, we want it in bite-sized chunks. Yet the primary way that information at schools and community events and work conferences or webinars is transmitted really hasn't changed in a very long time. And this is running up against the way in which we and certainly our audiences are receiving information. Our expectations about how we receive information and shape time have changed, but the way in which we deliver condensed information in presentations to community partners or the public largely has not. And this usually makes presentations feel pretty boring. This is probably you after 5 minutes of listening someone to talk at you in a classroom or on Zoom, or heaven forbid you spend 4 hours in an all-day conference online, right? It's hard to pay attention. But presentations are still important. Presentations are valuable because they allow us to distill the most important things that an audience needs to know into meaningful chunks without making them wade through encyclopedic readings or books. They help our audiences, our colleagues, our project partners know what's important. They are still valuable, even if we don't necessarily see them as being always valuable. So before I get any further, and this is my first question for you, and I'd love for you to type your answer into the text chat. So these kind of questions I'm going to throw out here, just feel free to type your answer into the text chat. Whatever comes to mind relatively quickly. You don't need particularly long answers at this point in time. So my first question for you today is, what makes for a good presentation? When you see someone in person, when you go to a conference, when you're doing a webinar or seeing a presentation online, what makes for a good presentation for you? Wow. All right. People are coming in super fast, which is awesome. I'm seeing engagement, humor, energy, confidence. Yes, absolutely. A timely topic feels more like a conversation than a lecture. High visuals, interaction, organized with main points highlighted. Absolutely. More participation, humor. Yeah, not just a lecture, not just a lecture. Connection. Emily, I love that. Connection is so important. I'm going to talk more about connection as we are. Not reading the slides. Thank you, Cherie or Cher, depending on how you pronounce your name. Absolutely. I'll talk more about that. Vulnerability, Krista, totally agree with you. Personal stories, Candy, absolutely. All of these things and presenter respecting people's time, 100% Mo. And I'll tell you what, reading off your slides is not respecting people's time. And I'll talk more about that. I get on my high horse talking about that. Absolutely. Enthusiasm. Yeah, humor's good. Humor's hard. I am a deeply unfunny person. You can ask my kids. I'm a deeply unfunny person. And humor's hard, but humor is a great way in the right context to make connections to people. It's all about making connections to other people. That's really what it's a lot. Yeah, everything's pertinent to the central topic. Totally agree, Anna. I hate when there are these kind of like tangents that go off and 15 minutes later you come back and you're like, why was that part of the presentation? Enthusiasm, being willing to adopt to the audience, providing an outline. Yeah, Paige, I think so. Outlines are interesting. And when I teach about this, I encourage my students not to include an outline, and there's reasons for that. And a lot of it has to do with storytelling and not ruining the surprise. But having a very clear outline for you as a presenter is so critical. And I'll talk more about that as we go on. And Diana says providing resources. Absolutely. And I promise to do some of that. So pretty much all agree with all these things. And we're going to talk about all these things today and try to put it through the lens of storytelling and, more importantly, increasing audience engagement and retention of information by using techniques from the movies. Really. Not only am I going to do that, I want you to try to get to think differently about how you design your presentations and certainly deliver your presentations. And I am not going to argue that presentations are always the best method to reach people, but they're a fact of life in the work that we do. They're everywhere and they serve a purpose. So let's figure out how we can make them better, how we can keep our audiences engaged, and get them to remember more of what we share through some of these storytelling techniques that have been around for certainly more than a century in movies, but also in literature, plays. Does anyone still go to the theater? I love the theater. I go all the time, or as often as I can. Books and epic poems, right? Epic poetry is storytelling. So these things work, and let's figure out how to harness them. But before we do that, I just want to tell you a little bit more about me and a little bit about my background. So many, many, many years ago, when I was in college, I was an English and theater major, and I had two main career goals in my life, or actually, sorry, three main career goals. I wanted to work in the U.S. regional theater circuit. I wanted to run my own theater company, and eventually I wanted to direct on Broadway. I'm a terrible actor, bad actor. I really excel behind the scenes, being and shaping performance, and that's part of the reason why I teach now, because that's really a lot of what I do. It's all about coaching people to sort of maximally engage with their audience and really be their best kind of presenter. And I got to do two of those three things. I worked in the regional theater circuit in the US for a few years, and I ran a theater company, a professional theater company in Baltimore. And then back in post 9/11, so more than almost 25 years ago now, my theater went under. There were a lot of arts organizations that went under as funding and donations shifted from arts organizations to 9/11 related charities, which made perfect sense, but that was the end of my sort of official theater career at the time. And I don't look at this as a time of failure in my life. I don't, not at all, because it shaped everything that I do. Everything that how I teach, how I present, how I build software. I spent really like almost the last 20 years building software, large educational systems for Hopkins and other institutions. And believe it or not, theater falls into that. Storytelling falls into that as well. And it's really led me to two sort of key principles about how I think about presenting, how I think about teaching, how I think about almost everything that I do. And the first is that learning is an act of narrative. Learning, teaching, presenting is an act of narrative. We take our audience from one understanding of the world to another. We lead them on a journey from point A to point B to point C with a shell of a script when we present or we more formally teach about them. We tell people, every time we teach, every time we present, we tell people a story. And that story changes the way our audience understands how they interact with the world. And narrative itself gives meaning to fact. Narrative is the context, the thing that tells your audience why something is important, and hopefully helps to keep them engaged and gets them to want to know more. Facts are great, facts are important, facts are meaningful, but they can't speak for themselves. If facts could speak for themselves, they'd write our papers for us, right? But we need narrative to have that context to get people engaged. And narrative itself, the act of telling a story or the act of organizing information in a narrative way, shapes our processing of that information, retention of that information, and desire to know more. How we tell is as important as what we tell. It has a measurable impact on information processing. Neuroscience for the last, 25, 30 years has shown that different parts of the brain light up when you tell stories versus simply stating information. And the four different phases of creating memory, intention, encoding, storage, and retrieval, of those four phases of creating memories, those first two phases, attention and encoding, are strongly, strongly affected by how that information is fed into our brains. And this is a really important point. Sensory and emotional cues shape our processing of narrative. They really do. How we remember things is largely tied in many ways to emotional or sensory experiences. There's lots of research on this, right? The shape of a space can affect our ability to remember things or affect our memory of things. So, for example, you're sitting in a really uncomfortable chair in a conference room or at a conference or in a gymnasium at like a parent-teacher conference. That uncomfortable space, the fact that your butt hurts after 15 minutes absolutely affects your ability to process that information and remember it on. You're probably going to remember your discomfort more than anything else. Or if you're, in a room and you're crowded together and you're feeling claustrophobic, that affects your ability to process information. Color affects our mood, our focus. This is why fast food restaurants who want to get you in and out, no pun intended for those of you who are familiar with the In-N-Out burger chain, this is why they use light colors, whites, yellows, bright reds. They want to create energy. They want to get you in and out of there really fast, that space really fast. Whereas more formal sit-down restaurants tend to use muted colors with softer music because they want you to sit and order more alcohol, alcohol being the primary driver of profit and sales at most sit-down restaurants. Sound is so important in terms of how we shape memory and the emotional cues that come from that. It takes two notes in the movie Jaws, right? In the movie Jaws, to establish a main villain, narrative tension, a sense of dread, all of those things that we associate with that movie now. And if you've ever seen the movie Jaws, you know which two notes I'm talking about, right? But you hear that and you're immediately like, I'm going to die in my bathtub or the shower because the shark's going to come up through the drain and eat me. Right? You remember those things, music and or the Imperial March from Star Wars, or the Close Encounters theme, or the Avengers theme. Those things really affect us. Visual composition, which I'm going to talk about a lot a little bit later on, affects how we process information. Works, right? How we process our information. Psychologists have shown us time and time again that we're engaged by and we're likely to recall things that appeal to multiple senses, excuse me. So if we can tap into our limbic system, which is sort of like the core of our emotional center down here at the close to our brain stem, if we can tap into that, we can not just get people to remember things for 5 minutes or 5 hours, but 5 or even in some cases 50 years. That's what we want to tap into there, right? Okay. So before I get into the other main principle, let's see. Mario asked, would science communicators like Mythbusters or the late Steve Irwin and the work they do be a good example of a good way to shape narrative and connect with the audience? Yes, right? So like Mythbusters play on fear and curiosity and humor, right? And they allow us to connect with people in really interesting ways. Now, they also tell really visually interesting stories, right? When they're like, what happens to the body when it gets in a car accident? And they show like, the sort of human body made out of gelatin and how it gets destroyed. Those are visually interesting things, but they're also connecting with our primary emotions. And Steve Irwin did that as well with his sense of wonder about the natural world. So yeah, they're great ways of connecting with the audience. Great question, Mario. I appreciate that. So the other the other sort of principle that I work from is that design is important. The look and feel of things is important. How things are laid out on the screen is important. It tells them a story as much as your content. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. We largely organize our emotional experience with narrative around visual cues. As long as we're not visually impaired, we largely organize our emotional experience with narrative around visual cues. It's been more than 25 years, but I can still remember so vividly, and it still makes me choke up sometimes, so clearly, in Titanic, the movie Titanic. There's the long extended sequence, right, where the ship hits the iceberg, slowly starts to sink, fills with water, and then the weight of the water causes the ship to break apart. And there's all these beautiful, incredible moments of like the water filling up staterooms and the band playing on the deck of the ship. And eventually the ship breaks in two, and Jack and Rose have climbed to the stern of the ship and are holding on, and Jack is yelling, "Don't let go, Rose. Don't let go." And there's this incredible noise and sort of visual orchestration that really plays at our emotions. And then all this noise for like 10, 15 minutes solid. And then we cut to the black, still water of the North Atlantic. And we focus on a body. And then James Cameron, the director, slowly pulls back, not to reveal one body or one person, but 100, and then thousands of people kicking and screaming and begging for their lives in the flat black water of the North Atlantic. It's incredibly powerful filmmaking. And as you can see, it's been more than 25 years, and I still remember that. I can still feel that experience. Hollywood spends billions of dollars every single year to manipulate our experience through the full spectrum of design techniques that they have at their disposal as artisans and artists. If anybody saw, of the Avengers movie, like what's the basic story of the Avengers movie, of Infinity War? Let's go live with that. Like, what's the basic story of Avengers Infinity War, right? It's man collects stones. That was the basic plot, but that's not how we remember that at all, right? Radically different experience. Barbie, right? The story of Barbie was about a doll embracing imperfection, but the experience we had as individuals was so, so different. And it's not just like, we also live in a design attuned world, right? It's these devices, right, absolutely affect us through their design. Target Boutique built an empire in the 2000s with the motto "Design for All." And it's not just the things we touch, but it's also the interfaces through which we interact with this information. And we're not all great natural born storytellers, but we are expected to entertain and hold our audience's attention at conferences and with community partners. And we're not all great natural born storytellers, but there are ways that we can present and structure information which facilitates that storytelling process. And I think we need to treat every presentation we give like a Hollywood production with Hollywood production values, not content values. That's a different story entirely. We need to think about how we direct and design our productions, our presentations, because this has an impact on our audience's ability to process, retain, and synthesize information for problem solving later on. Because if all you do is post your PowerPoint the same as you ever did, you've walked into, if one of the biggest, if not the biggest trap in presenting, and certainly in higher education, to be perfectly honest. This is a trap. PowerPoint is a trap. It makes it easy to dump information quickly, but not effectively. It's a trap. For those of you looking for your Star Wars Admiral Akbar moment, there it is. It's a trap. So let me ask you this question. When you fire up PowerPoint, and you click that new slide button, what is the template that comes up in front of you when you click new slide? Anybody? Anybody remember? I go into PowerPoint, I click new slide. Anybody remember what that is? Yeah. Header text, title, bullets, right? That's the default. There's a title at the top, and there's a box in which you can put stuff, but the default that most people use and that PowerPoint encourages you, the first thing on the list, is a bullet list. So what did you see in your high school education? Title and bullets. What did you see in your undergraduate education? Title and bullets. What do I see every day at the Bloomberg School of Public Health? Title and bullets. What do I see every time I go to a conference? Title and bullets. That is fast, but not effective information dissemination. And this is a phenomenon known in psychology as functional fixedness. We use things in the way they are first presented to us. So we see title and bullets, and that's what we use. That's what we choose to use. Again, great for information dumping, but not effective instruction or information dissemination or getting people to remember something. And if you want to take one thing away from today's entire webinar, start outside of PowerPoint. Don't build your presentation in PowerPoint first. Use a yellow legal pad. That's what I do. I'm a weirdo. I write things down. Or use a simple text editor, whether it's like TextEdit or Word or BBEdit if you're a Mac person. Use a text edit. Make an outline. Make sure all of your ideas flow and that your key point or points are getting across. Because if you do that in a simple text editor, you won't get bogged down by fonts and colors and pictures and layout issues. And by developing your main ideas outside of PowerPoint, you'll help ensure that you are building the best version of your presentation, not a rushed version of your presentation. So, what I want to do with the rest of my time in this presentation is to give you some of ways to avoid this trap of PowerPoint by using narrative techniques from film and from stage or epic poems or literature that actually just work. So Joy wants to know, before I get to my next question, because I'm also ready to ask you another question. Joy says, how can I do storytelling with reading from a teacher's manual or on prevention education? So this is a really important and hard topic, right? You're given, and I'm going to assume, Joy, you're talking about you are like given a slide deck and like you cannot change this slide deck. You cannot alter this in any way, shape, or form. That happens, right? That absolutely happens. And I think what you want to do the best thing you can do is bring yourself into it. Tell stories that are resonant and relevant to those slide decks, to the bullet points. And also remember that if you've been giving a super heavy bullet point slide deck, people are going to read that, right? People are going to read it long before you get to speaking over it. So you can say, I'm not going to cover all these things. Please read and make sure. And if you have questions, you can ask, but I want to talk about X. I want to tell you a story about Y, or this person, or this experience I had, or this really important article, or this really important news story, and how it specifically relates to what we're talking about here. You might have to adjust time and shuffle things around a little bit, but that's one way of doing storytelling when you are locked into like a teacher's guide or a pre-built slide deck right there. Yeah. Okay. So my next question for everybody is thinking about stories, thinking about TV shows, movies. What are the elements of a good narrative, a good story? Think about a TV show that you like. Think about a movie that you like, or a book that you may have just read, for those of you who are still reading books. What makes for a good story? What makes for a good story? All right, Diana's is relatable. Gwen's is compelling characters, evokes emotions, right? Keely, pacing, totally agree, Keely. Good character development, tension, not knowing what's going to come next. Conflict, Tyra, yes, absolutely. Humor, strong characters. They're a story that is, what do you write? That is, it's scrolling by so fast, it's hard for me to see. A story that's just outside my realm, Stephanie says. And it has to be, yes, a plot that draws you in, an arc and a resolution prizes, right? A human quality, complexity, irreverence, humor, absolutely. A plot with a great ending. We all need a good conclusion to it, right? Realistic line, strong storyline. Big on the show and don't tell. Yes, absolutely. Something that reminds you of your own family, right? Absolutely. These are all elements of a good story, of any good story. And what I want to do in the next segment is focus on talk about these very specific techniques from film, stage that can make your delivery more engaging and increase information retention over time. And they're really, I'm kind of, and what you all talked about and entered in the chat, I'm kind of going to try to distill to like into 4 or 5 techniques here that I want to go over. And, these techniques, again, have been used for thousands of years. They really just work. I will say that you have to apply every technique to every presentation. But as I go through them, think about how you might apply these techniques to your presentations, to the presentation you're going to give, to the talks you're going to give, to an intro to somebody else. I will try out how you might use them if they are if they feel like a lot of techniques can't get them all. Don't worry about that. Pick one technique, start with it, and work from there. Yeah, so Cynthia asked a really good question in the Q&A that I would like to answer before I get started. Address the ethical conflict when a presenter injects too personal experience, like personal recovery experiences. This is a really fine needle to thread and one that I personally have challenges with. I have lots of stories I want to share. Part of my goal as a presenter is to connect to the audience, and I'm going to talk more about connecting and being vulnerable and how important that is. However, especially when you're talking about trauma, it's really important that you approach that kind of trauma in, while not, purely humorous, but in a way that doesn't make your audience relive that trauma. Speaking neutrally about it without getting overwhelmed by emotion. If you do get overwhelmed by emotion when speaking towards trauma, I would recommend that you avoid that or have someone else speak if you're working in a group setting so that again, the thing you want to avoid is having your participants feel that trauma on a very deep level. I told the story about the Titanic and how it makes me feel, and for some people, maybe that sort of memory or the is traumatic, or the idea of drowning is really traumatic, and there's always sort of a balance that you have to try and play there. If you're talking about emotional experiences for you as a presenter, losing a loved one, a family member, a parent, you probably want to mention in some level, like, hey, I'm going to talk about something that may make you uncomfortable. Although there is research that shows that trigger warnings actually do more harm than good. There's actually quite a bit of research that says, if you put up like a big trigger warning thing, people who have experienced that tend to bring up those memories in a really powerful and negative way that makes it difficult for them to engage and difficult for them to process that. So while you can say this might make you feel uncomfortable, that's probably a better way of going than saying trigger warning, topic XYZ, because there's research that basically says that sort of forces people to relive that. So I think you want to be a little bit careful about sort of how much vulnerability you have, but vulnerability allows us to connect to each other as real people. And that is super important. That allows you to connect to your audience there. Yeah, it's not your group therapy. Exactly, Nicole. I think that's a great way of saying it. I might steal that from you in the future, if that's okay. Yeah. All right. So back to the technique. Let's jump right in. So number one, first off, top of the list is conflict. Conflict. Conflict is the cornerstone of narrative. Narrative without conflict is boring. Jaws without the shark would be a lovely day on Martha's Vineyard, but I'm not paying $25 and sitting in a movie theater for 2 hours to watch people sitting on the beach and going fishing, right? We need conflict. And obviously, in a show like Jaws or a movie like Star Wars or Game of Thrones or Severance, the conflict is obvious and big and real. In public health, in substance misuse prevention, I think the question is that you want to ask is, what is the obstacle that needs to be overcome? What is the obstacle that needs to be overcome? And then what stories can I tell about something that I experienced or something that I know happened that will frame my issue through conflict? Because conflict drives engagement. It creates meaning for our audience. We all sort of have daily conflicts and we all understand like how we can work through it. And it structures your presentation to this nice little kind of three-act structure, right? Background, problem, solution. It gives cohesion and coherence to your entire presentation when you frame ideas or frame issues through conflict. So try to position problems in the foreground, oops, and then show how you can overcome them. Or in the case of an intractable problem, what needs to be worked on. But always try to frame things through conflict. Again, it doesn't have to be like violent conflict, but challenges. What are the challenges? What's the obstacle? What's the problem that needs to be overcome? Very important. Next up, character, people. So when I started working at the Bloomberg School of Public Health almost 30 years ago now, I didn't really honestly know that much about public health because I had come from a very different background. And one of my faculty members there who's still there, she's amazing. Her name is Marie Diener West. She's the head of the Master of Public Health program. She's a biostatistician, an amazing person. She said, look, public health, let me tell you what public health is or what define public health. She said, public health is about people, populations. Medicine is about a person, but public health is about populations, groups of people, people. Public health is about people. I was like, cool, great, I get it. So public health is about people. Nanobiotechnology is about people. Economics is about people. Statistics are about people. Art history is about people. Addiction and drug use abatement is about people. Everything's about people. So find opportunities to bring stories about yourself, people you know, people who are involved in research, famous researchers, public figures, whatever it is, into your presentations. Because from the time we are babies, we are drawn naturally to people and faces, particularly babies, infants, toddlers. They are completely fascinated by faces, and we continue with this even as adults. This is why we always like, we look at people. We want to, even though we don't want to be rude, don't want to stare at somebody, we look at people's faces. We have a natural instinct to do this because we want to connect as human beings to other human beings. For most of us, not everybody. I mean, there are some neurodivergent folks for whom this is not the case, but the vast majority of people, of humans, we want to connect to other people. Because when you present for true lasting effect, not only do you have to persuade the rational brain that something is true through facts, evidence, and reason, but you also have to resonate through the emotional brain, right? Resonate with the emotional brain to say, this is important, this is how we connect as people, and this is how this affects you as a person. So tell stories, not just about yourself, but the people who are affected by the work or the topic that you're speaking on, behind the research, behind the discoveries, and draw people into your graphs, your data, your charts. You can do that. If you are talking about, let's say, this is an example that I give to my students in the School of Public Health. Let's say you're talking about the increase in maternal mortality in the state of Texas since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And you have a line chart that shows, like, here's where Roe v. Wade was overturned, and here's the increase in maternal mortality. And you've talked about Bethany, a woman who lives in Houston who died from complications after childbirth. You would point to that increase in the graph and say, this is Bethany. This is the impact of this. So draw people in your data and charts because we are more likely to remember people instead of abstractions, particularly numeric or policy-based abstractions. So always find an opportunity to bring people into your presentations. Next up is pace. So I think someone mentioned this earlier, pace. Pace is so important. Pace is probably the most important tool a director has in their arsenal for shaping narrative and the audience's emotional experience. And it's really ultimately a key tool in maintaining audience engagement. So just like in acts of a play or in a movie script or a TV show or chapters in a book, we need, when we present, to chunk our content into logical sections. This helps us make a mental model of the whole presentation, especially in longer presentations like the one you're sitting through today, but also in shorter presentations. It's still valuable. It helps us to organize information into meaningful sections. And for our audiences, having clear delimiters between those sections helps give a sense of moving forward. I was saying this to Chris and Rebecca before we started, but the fact of the matter is the human brain craves novelty. And we need to constantly have this sense sense of moving forward. Otherwise, we become stuck. We become bored. We become antsy to move on to something new. And there's only so long that an audience can really pay attention to things. There's been lots of studies on this. For example, the US Navy did a study of its commissioned officers. So these are people who have been to like the Naval Academy, who are trained to pay attention for long periods of time during high intensity, high impact situations, literally life or death situations. And they did a study where they put a bunch of commissioned officers in classrooms over the course of like a year or so. And they studied like how long could these people who have been trained to really pay attention for a long period of time, how long could they sit in a classroom and pay attention before there was significant mind wandering and lack of information retention. Anybody want to guess how long these folks could these commissioned officers could pay attention for in in a classroom setting, kind of like this? I mean, now we would do it in classrooms or conferences or well, now Zoom as well. So we're seeing like 20 minutes, 45 minutes. Vic, 4 minutes. That's pretty short, Vic. 5 minutes, 10 at most, 45, 10, 10, 45, 20, 10, 60, 30. So the answer is a little bit in between. For them in this study, it was 18 minutes. 18 minutes they could pay attention before there was significant lack of attention and mind wandering. Now, this study was done in 1974, and you can imagine with these devices this day, it's probably a whole lot less, and it is. John Medina is a biologist who teaches at the University of Washington. He did a study focusing primarily on his 4.0 A-level students who were in their junior or senior year, or as grad students who had already demonstrated at least 1 year of academic excellence of getting a 4.0. He found that for those students, they could only pay attention for 10 minutes before there was significant lack of information retention and mind wandering. So we have to think about how long we're chunking things and thinking about that, 10, 15-minute limit. And cell phones, yeah, it's probably more like 5 minutes now. And I work at the Center for Teaching and Learning at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm the director there, and we collect a lot of data from our students. And we can see like how long do they sit on a slide when we're watching something. And it's about 2 minutes. 2 minutes is the maximum before they'll jump ahead, skip ahead. This is like, watching a movie or a TV show, when it has a faster pace, there's going to be a stronger pull, right? A show like The Pit on HBO is super fast paced because it's in an emergency room, and it's really like life is busy in an emergency room. A really slow burn, as they call it, TV show or movie or book, it's hard to stay engaged with that, right? It's hard to maintain that engagement. But you want to strike that balance between fast and slow because going through too many slides too rapidly is exhausting. No one's going to be able to keep up. But you don't want to really spend more than about 2 minutes on an individual slide. So think about chunking stuff into 10 to 15-minute sections, and then on an individual slide about 2 minutes. And that's really what the data shows there. All right, next up. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because it's a little more practical in some ways. And we'll talk about composition. Composition is a narrative technique, certainly in the world of filmmaking and TV. And the visual arts, of course, as well. How you lay out your slides. This is all about how you lay out your slides. And really my key point here is you want to help your learners, your audience, focus on the right piece of information at the right time, on the key piece of information you want them to remember, and not make them guess what they should be looking at. Gwen, there's a question that came in the Q&A that I want to answer here. Gwen asks, does the decrease in attention mean that interactivity in presentations is more important than ever? And do you intentionally schedule those to align with your pacing and presentations? Yes and yes. Absolutely. Interactivity becomes more important. Again, we also have an entire generation of folks who have been raised on more active learning techniques, as they're called, in the classroom. That used to be the case that like active learning was like a K-6 thing. Then it became much more, where you learn a little bit, you hear some didactic material, then you apply it right away, or that's really constructivist learning. But the idea of like asking questions, keeping your audience involved. Now that's a common technique in high schools and even in many undergraduate and starting to get into graduate programs. So audience members that you're going to be speaking to are used to that and they want that. So yeah, you definitely want to increase the amount of interactivity and try to pace it through your presentation so that people don't get bored. I ask simple questions a lot in my presentations, just like I'm doing today, to help break that monotony. So it's not just Brian talking, even though there's a lot of that. You're getting an opportunity to jump in, to answer questions in a relatively straightforward way, because that helps to keep you engaged. And ideally, the questions are helping to make things meaningful for you as well. That's usually the other thing. So yeah, it absolutely affects pace and it absolutely affects where you should be putting interactivity in there. Great question, Gwen. Thank you. So, composition, whether we recognize it or not, there is an implicit hierarchy, visual hierarchy that tells our audiences that something's important and something is not when we present, especially when we use slides. Jakob Nielsen is a very well-known human-computer interaction expert. He did a study in 2006 that he then replicated again in 2014, 2018, and then again just last year, sorry, in 2024, which is now, I guess, a year and a half ago. Replicated the same subject. And he found that when people view screens, and again, this could be your laptop, this could be a monitor, this could be your phone, or this could be a screen on which slides are projected. Anytime people view screens, we in the West read in an F-shaped pattern. So we start in the upper left corner of the screen, we go across, we go back to the left, we go across a little bit, and then we go down. And the things that we see at the top are the most important, and the things we see at the bottom are the least important. So if you are using bullet lists, which I'll argue is not a particularly great technique, and you don't seem using them because, again, people tend to read ahead of you, which I'll talk about in a second. If you are using bullet lists and you put your most important point as the last point in the screen, you are diminishing the impact and memorability of that point. You don't want to do that. You also don't necessarily want to put things on the right side of the screen because when we visit websites, anyone want to take a guess as to what's on the right side of most web pages that we visit? Like you're reading New York Times ads. Thank you, Luca. Exactly. Ads, ads, ads. So we train ourselves to ignore things on the right side of the screen because that's the primary prominent location for ads. And of course, advertisers and web content companies have figured this out. That's why you read a paragraph and there's a giant ad, and you read a paragraph and there's a giant ad. Yeah. But we ignore things on the right side of the screen because the primary activities, the primary things we see tend to be on the left. So we have to think about how we organize information on our screens. And here's an example of that. This is a beautiful, humane mind map illustration about decluttering or organizing your lives, right? Organizing your lives here. So there's lots of stuff here. There's a monkey, there's a penguin, there's a non-scary clown hanging out in the corner there. But if I say, okay, take a look at the part where it says you can organize things into drawers, sheds, and garages. And I'm just going to keep talking here. And while I'm talking, you're trying to look and scan this mind map to see where it is. And you might be missing something that I'm focusing on because this is a lot of information to process. It's a lot. It's beautiful and well drawn and humane, but it's a lot to process for you to be able to pay attention while I continue talking. For me, this is much more effective. This is simple, clear, and emotionally resonant. Actually, putting things in the lower right corner of the screen, because it's a part of the screen we usually ignore, makes things feel lonely and solitary. There's actual like emotional qualities to different parts of the screen, just like there's emotional qualities to different parts of the stage when you're directing and putting people on different parts of the stage there. It's a beautiful image. And when it comes to presenting information visually, less is almost always more. Putting everything you need to say or that your audience needs to know might be convenient for you. Putting everything you say on the slide, bullet lists, long pieces of text, boxes, multiple graphs, tables, charts, whatever. It might be convenient for you, but it negatively impacts your pace and it absolutely negatively impacts the audience's focus. I've heard this referred to as the toxicity of information overload. Cognitive science, time and again, has shown us that too much information overwhelms us. It negatively affects those two first steps of creating memories, attention and processing. We just shut down because we don't know where to look. It's too much. It's hard to keep up. It's not a good experience for people. And when it comes to reading in particular, you are not the hare in this race between the tortoise and the hare, right? We all read faster than people can talk. I'm a fast talker, as you're experiencing this today. But certainly in academia and certainly in the community of science, people read faster than they talk. So please, please, again, if you take nothing else away from today, please stop reading your slides. Please stop reading your slides. Because if everything your audience needs to know is on your slides, why are you there? Why are you presenting? Your slides should be reinforcing what you are saying. And if you're dumping data with table after table after chart, why is that not a document that you give people that they can read and more effectively process than a presentation where often tables in particular are vertically oriented, or slides are horizontally oriented, and we cut information off. It makes it harder to see things there. So please stop reading your slides. Okay. Kate wants to know, how can you balance less is more with presentations that are recorded and need to meet web accessibility standards? That is a great question, Kate. I'm going to talk about that in one moment here with some things about notes and handouts. But I will tell you, my slides are fully accessible. Like they meet all the 508 requirements. They are highly accessible to accessibility needs because I include proper titles. I include the correct reading order. Like I have my PowerPoint reading order. Chris makes sure of this. Chris Reed, who runs the GLPTTC, make sure that like all my stuff is in the correct reading order and that I'm using large fonts for the most, almost always using large fonts, and that visuals have alt text on them and that they're meaningful, that all of these things are meaningful. And I try to describe things on the screen as well, right? That box in the corner, right? I said, this thing is in the lower right corner here. So you can get a visual idea of where things are. So just because you don't have a lot of information on each individual slide does not mean you're not going to meet accessibility requirements. You have to be careful about what you talk about. Recording should always, always, always have transcripts. Always, without exception, high quality transcripts. Nowadays with generative AI, the transcript quality has really, really gotten much better. But again, you can meet all those accessibility standards without having to have bullet lists, without having to read off the screen. You just need to be intentional and proactive about it. And one of the ways, and I know this is hard, I get this is hard, right? People are like, but if I don't have everything on the slides, I won't remember what to say. Use your slide notes for that. And this also helps with accessibility. I put lots of notes, lots of text, lots of, my references, the years, the name of the researchers, the studies, phrases that I'm going to say into my slide notes. And I turn those into handouts. I can give those. I can give like to my students, I can give, full PowerPoint files and they'll see the slide notes there. Plus they have the transcript to follow along. And it's relatively straightforward to turn your PowerPoint notes into handouts that you can give people. And that helps with accessibility as well. And by the way, if you're using font sizes less than 36 points, I'm sorry, but you're doing it wrong. Let me repeat that, right? If you're using font sizes less than 36 points, you're doing it wrong. Again, especially from an accessibility perspective, I'm a 56-year-old dude. I can't see things as well as I used to. I often, when I go to conferences, have to sit in the very front row because I cannot see text that's like smaller than 24 points. I can't. But also by showing less data on or less visual information on each slide, we can see those things more clearly. We can make them bigger. It can be easier for our audiences to follow along. Slides are just bits and bytes these days. Not many people print out slide decks anymore. That used to be a big consideration in the past. Not so much anymore, right? People, if they're going to annotate, they annotate in a tool like Acrobat or another tool. They're not printing it out. And the reason why so many people used to use bullet slides is because it reduced the amount of printing that we have to do. That is not so much a consideration anymore. But no matter what, try to keep your font sizes big, except for citations. Citations should be small and out of the way, right? But try to keep your font sizes big here. So oftentimes at this point in the presentation, people are like, okay, so no data? I'm not supposed to show stuff? I'm supposed to have like 2 words on the slide? No, not no data. Data is important, data is critical, but we as presenters must be critical about how much data we choose to show. We need to help our audience focus on the right piece of data at the right time. We can clarify our message by simplifying the presentation, right? Like I said, you don't need to have bullet lists. Split it apart onto separate slides, as long as you're not losing context. Put something on there that says, this is the topic that we're in right now as you're going through the separate bullets on separate slides. But more importantly, edit ruthlessly. And I mean ruthlessly. And this is hard to do. Unless you're doing a PhD dissertation defense, your audience does not need encyclopedic knowledge. It might be interesting. It might be secondary. You're like, oh, but this is this cool secondary. No, cut it out. When in doubt, if it feels boring to you, if it feels like a side topic to you, cut it out. This is hard to do. Martin Scorsese, one of our greatest living directors, who does things that I could never do in a million years as a director. So much visual energy, such a great storyteller. He suffers from too much. If anybody saw like The Irishman, right? That was a 3.5-hour movie that should have been really 3 episodes of a short miniseries, right? Again, he does amazing, incredible work. Killers of the Flower Moon, another great story, super important. The book was fantastic. The movie was excellent. 3.5 hours. It is hard to keep somebody's attention for that long without a break. It really is. And we can use PowerPoint or Keynote or Prezi or Google presentations as a camera, just like they do in movies, right? You don't see everything in the world when you're watching a movie or TV show. You're seeing what the camera shows you. And we can use that camera to reduce complexity, to help us process the story and not the presentation of the story. We can use it to drill down and pull out key data points in complex visuals. Let me give you an example of this. So here I have a not so complex line chart, right, of incidence rates of hepatitis between 1983 and 1993 in the US. Now, if I ask you to say, okay, take a look where like the 5 through 39-year-olds converged in 1987, because this is really important. In 1987, blah, 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 blah. So again, you're trying to do this work. You're trying to like look on the line chart. Where's 87? Which color maps to the yellow? Oh, that's five. While I'm talking, right? That's hard to do. Instead, I can add a very, very simple PowerPoint shape that literally took me 5 seconds to add, and you know exactly where to look. There is no guesswork here. If I want to talk about an entire series, like all of 1987, I can use a shape, a simple shape right there to do that, right? Or I could use an overlay to push back or fade out certain parts of the chart that aren't important to help elevate and highlight the part of the chart that is important. These are all really simple shapes that take seconds to add, make a huge difference in terms of your audience's ability to keep up with you and to process data as clearly and as rapidly as possible. You can do the same thing with tables, right? With simple overlays within tables makes it really important to do this. The key point here is you want to show the right detail at the right time to help clarify your messaging, to make sure your audience can keep up. These are really easy to add. Please add them. Please use them. So Josie wants to know, can we get a one pager with all these neat tips and tricks? Sure. Absolutely. I'm going to have one. I didn't prepare one for today, but I will prepare that and send it to Chris and Rebecca. I'll just pull up one of the ones that I had from before and make sure that you get that kind of highlighted version of all that. Yeah. So Natalie, I will definitely do that. Give you like a Word one pager with highlights of all these things right here. I think that would definitely be helpful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. All right. So moving on from composition, the last technique I want to talk about, and we're going to get to put some of these in practice, I promise. It's not just going to be Brian talking endlessly. But let me talk about reflection for a moment. Reflection. Activities that you can build into your presentations that directly encourage or sponsor reflection significantly increase audience engagement. Reflection is the heart of all the arts: film, theater, dance, literature, writing, visual arts, right? Performance, any kind, music. How does this relate to me? How do I understand this? What is my interpretation of this? How does this connect to my life, right? Reflection is so important. If you can get your audiences to think about how this might apply to them personally through stories or examples or simple questions, they are much more likely to remember what you say or to be moved to action on the issue. Find opportunities to reflection. And this is so easy to do, right? This is absolutely a best practice in youth development, Nicole. Absolutely, right? What does this mean to me? How is this applicable to my life? Why should I care about this, right? Why should I care? And this is so easy to do. You just ask a question. Now, the youth may not respond to it. Your undergraduates, your high school students, your teenagers may not respond right away, but it gets them thinking. It gets them engaged. And this really takes very little effort to design into a presentation. This is great to do at the start of a presentation. There was a study out of UC Davis back in 2014 that shows that when you ask a question near or at the beginning of a presentation, our curiosity is naturally piqued. And piquing our curiosity stimulates our hippocampus in our brain, and that gets us ready to not only learn about the main subject at hand, but helps us remember incidental facts, stories, and information that are presented along the way, along with our key messaging. So people will remember more when you ask them a simple question. And, your own personal stories, your aha moments of success or of overcoming conflict or failure. I talk about failure a lot, right? Not because I think my life is a failure, but we connect through failure. We're always connected. We're always having failures in our life, big and small. But these are emotional points from which information retention is based. Conflict, Troubles, stories of triumph, or failure help us to connect to each other as an audience. They make us vulnerable. They make us human, right? When we meet somebody or we're seeing somebody on a stage or on Zoom or whatever, one of the first questions we ask ourselves is, how do you speak to me as a fellow human being? Because that affects whether or not I trust you, whether or not I want to listen to you. So try to make those connections. Share something relevant about your life, right? About that's relevant to the work that you're doing. Tell those stories. Stories are powerful because they are meaningful to us as human beings. They've been meaningful since the time we had communication, visual communication, since the time we had formal language. Stories are powerful because they are meaningful. Share them. Get your audience to reflect on them and find their own stories in that topic as well. And you will have made a really powerful and profound connection to your audience, and they will remember what you have to say. Okay, so now that I've rambled on about the different techniques for quite a while, I want to do a brief exercise with everybody here, okay? So we're going to brainstorm about how you might individually use these techniques. Now, I'm going to ask you to basically take one of the techniques I just covered and apply it to a presentation or training that you've recently given or regularly give or one you're working on. And it doesn't need to be really well thought out, but here's the format I'd like you to use. So in my presentation on whatever topic you're going to be presenting on, I could apply conflict by, I could apply character by, I could apply, pacing or segmenting by, I could apply reflection by. Pick one. You don't have to do all four. Pick one of those about a presentation or topic that you've given or are working on giving, and then how could you apply that? And then think about it and type it in the text chat. I'm going to sit quietly here for a minute, for about 2 minutes while you think about this. So think about, again, in my presentation on whatever, I could apply this selected technique that I covered in the presentation so far by doing X. Give us an example of how you could apply it. So I'm going to sit here quietly for about 2 minutes, wait for stuff to come in, and then we'll share it out. We'll start talking about them, and we'll go from there. All right. It's about 2 minutes there, and people are already putting these excellent examples into the chat. So let me just read some of these. So Jennifer, the first one to respond, said, in my presentation on Catch My Breath, I could apply reflection by asking them their understanding and knowledge of the subject before I even get started. That's a great technique. What do you know, or what do you think you know, right? Flipping the script on people and subverting their expectations are like, oh, I know all about X, right? The dangers of cigarette smoking or vaping, right? I know all about that. But through your presentation, you can surprise them by providing information, facts, data that they had no idea about, right? Those kind of wow moments. You're like, I didn't think about that. I didn't know that. That's a great way to drive engagement. Brooke says, in my presentation to my board, I could apply composition and decluttering with less pictures on one slide to be more simple with how I organize information. Absolutely. Absolutely. Lisa says, in my presentation about youth substance use, I can apply character by bringing in personal stories from the youth in our community. I will tell you, I mean, I talk about storytelling all the time, but oftentimes the most effective form of storytelling comes from participants. Now, obviously, with youth, you have to be concerned about, privacy and, is it age appropriate and the questions you're asking. But I tell, like, for example, at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, where I run the Center for Teaching and Learning, I tell my teams, oftentimes the most effective moments are when faculty get up in front of our other faculty and tell their stories. I can talk about best practices for presenting. I can talk about my own experiences, but getting those shared experiences from the audience is deeply profound and deeply meaningful to people because they're like, this isn't an expert. This is somebody who's lived it and done it. So those kind of like sharing of stories, absolutely, absolutely. So Hope says, in my presentation on evaluation data utilization, I could apply conflict by creating focal points on the slide, creating tension, and asking a question. Right? What's at stake? What are the problems in the data? What would it mean if we push this data, right, evaluation data, straight out without using data cleaning, sort of traditional data science techniques here? What would that mean? What would the downstream consequences be? Which could be pretty bad. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you present data, Diana says, in my presentation on parent-teen program, I can apply reflection when presenting data, right? Here's data. What does this mean to you? What does it make you think about the topic? Have you changed your opinion? Could you see how legislation, could you see how an intervention could reduce these numbers? Wouldn't that be worthwhile to do, right? That's great for funding pitches, right? You're speaking to a NGO or a community foundation or local elected officials. Like, here's a story, here's data, and here's how bad things could get, and here's how good they could get through data there. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Abigail says a story about my recovery from SUD, your own personal story, and also use a character by telling a story about a youth from a book I read recently named Silas, who was successful against all odds because he had adult and community connection to help him through. Absolutely. Showing how we're all in this together. Absolutely. Oh, I love this one. Angela. In my presentation on understanding addiction, I could apply reflection by asking pre-med students about their coping mechanisms, gaming, coffee, shopping, scrolling. Absolutely. As health scientists and medical health professionals, we often talk about things like addiction and we don't sort of engage and realize like, oh yeah, we're addicted to certain things too, right? Like pre-med students addicted to coffee, that is real, right? Or gaming as a coping mechanism, or shopping as a coping mechanism. Shopping therapy is a real thing. So these are all really good examples. Thank you so much for these. I wish I had time to go through all of them, but I don't. But I just want to say, like, these are great examples of exactly how you could apply these. And again, start with one technique, build to adding more techniques as you go along because it'll become easier and easier to do. Start with conflict, start with reflection, start with character, start with simplifying your visual presentation to help focus the right piece of data at the right time. Then add more techniques over time, and it will make a really big difference. It really, really will. So these are great examples. I really appreciate this. I do want to move on because we have more content to get to, but actually, we're going to do really quickly. Rebecca's going to put a little poll here in the chat. I would really appreciate everybody responding to this while I answer a couple of questions that have come in from the Q&A pod. So Brianna wants to know, can I discuss engaging participants who do not want to actively participate? This is a good one because at the end of the day, you really can't make folks participate. You can't. If somebody doesn't want to talk, they're not going to talk. And trying to force people to talk just leads to a really uncomfortable situation. So some techniques I would encourage you to use are icebreakers at the beginning, right? Simple questions like ask, what makes for a good presentation? Well, pretty much anybody can answer that. It's simple, it's broad. Even if somebody's not going to speak out loud, they'll think about it themselves. They're going to get more reflective. They're going to get more engaged just by doing that. Also, have answers ready, have stories ready. So when I teach at Bloomberg sometimes, I'll have these kind of like open office hour sessions, and I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the class, and I'll say, okay, what questions do you have? And almost invariably, silence. Because nobody wants to speak first, right? So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, so here's a question that I usually get asked, and let me answer it for you. So I'm pretending that there's somebody out there who's asked that question, or it's something that usually comes up, and I provide the answer, and that's usually a way to get people talking and starting talking. So be prepared with your own examples, your own stories. Ask very, very simple questions at the beginning of the session. Do polls. Polls are great. Zoom polls are great. So we do a lot of research or some research on student learning experiences at my job at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Bloomberg. And we ask about, what do you like about Zoom sessions? Since so many online classes use Zoom sessions, even some on-campus ones when it's snowing or there's a snowstorm like there was a couple weeks ago in Baltimore. And what we hear time again is that students really like polls because polls do not force anyone to put themselves out there. They don't have to type a question or something that has their name next to it. They don't have to raise their hand, put themselves on the spot. It allows them to be a participant in a very low friction way, which is definitely, yeah, that it's a very kind of low friction way to be engaged, right? Without having to sort of put yourself on the spot there. So I think those are some ways of getting people or helping to work through that. I've absolutely given hour-long trainings in a room full of 5 people where nobody asks a question once. And that's super frustrating and challenging, but just you got to power through it, you got to plow through it. Absolutely. Yeah, so Natalie wants to know, do I suggest using these techniques in grant writing? Yes. Storytelling in grant writing is really powerful. Data by itself is easy to dismiss in a spreadsheet. You're like, well, we just don't have the money for that. Data plus stories is much more effective and much more powerful and much more memorable. So, yeah, absolutely. I would suggest doing this in your grant writing narratives. Angela, I can look up the stuff, the research about trigger warnings. I don't have it like off the top of my head or right at my disposal, but I can try and pull that up for you there. If you do like Google searches or Google Scholar around like, trigger warning effectiveness, like the first 4 or 5 results will be those studies that have said, let's not do this at all. Yeah, so again, I think yeah, I'll send that out to you. I'll also do the one pager for everybody here. Let me just say that, one thing that I know that comes up often in substance misuse prevention research is sort of like personal testimony and whether or not that's effective. So I would just caution everyone that sharing your own stories about overcoming an addiction as like a primary sort of presentation strategy for youth in particular is challenging. I know there's literature around that, research around that. I would caution that. I have teenagers on my own. My oldest, trust me, we've all seen it. They don't listen. There's this invincibility quality. Personal stories are not relevant to them because A, they feel like they're going to live forever, and B, they have a sort of distrust of, authority, parental figures, things like that. So I would caution about using heavy personal testimony in youth-based presentations to youth. It's not particularly effective. There are other ways around social responsibility that are more effective. So I just keep that in mind. Definitely keep that in mind. Yeah. So all right. So I think. Everyone voted in the poll. Thank you for doing that. Natalie wants to know what's the best poll software to use. I don't know. I use Zoom and Poll Everywhere are the two kind of poll tools that I use, Natalie. Poll Everywhere for live sessions and Zoom's polls, I think, are perfectly good for the Zoom sessions. WebEx has polls built in. What I like about Poll Everywhere is you can insert that into slides. They have a bunch of different question types. It's pretty effective. So Poll Everywhere is the name of that software. And I use that in the live situations, but online, I just use whatever's built into the platform, Zoom or WebEx or what have you. Yeah. All right, so thank you everyone for voting in the poll. I greatly appreciate it. This feels like a good time for us to take a little break. We're going to take a 5-minute break, just 5 minutes. We're going to come back and do some more exercises and learn about storytelling frameworks. So Rebecca's going to put up the 5-minute timer here. I'm going to stop sharing my slides really quickly here so Rebecca can do that. So we're going to take 5 minutes, go to the bathroom, get some coffee, get some water, stretch your legs. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, you enjoyed your little 5 minute break there. Let me get back to the content at hand here. Let's see. Abigail asked, "How do you feel about whiteboard or other interactive type templates?" Yeah, it depends on, again, if you have specific goals that are going to help you in this, in terms of, achieving those goals, and the whiteboard's the way to do it. I would use the whiteboard, right? So I don't personally use whiteboards a lot in my presentations. I tend to rely more on my slides, whether it's PowerPoint or Keynote or something else. But again, if it's the right tool for the job, go ahead and use it, right? It is another layer of interaction, and people love interaction. So I would absolutely recommend, trying to incorporate tools where they work and where they work best for you there. Um, all right, so I know we've got about 45 minutes left. And I want to make sure we get through all the content. So I will move forward. And I want to, now that we're back in, I want to try to get back into things. So let's take what you learned about composition in the last segment, composition, just for that sort of long segment before the break there, and apply it to some real slides from real actual students in some of my classes at Johns Hopkins School, Bloomberg School of Public Health. So remember, these are slides from students who are probably halfway through one of my classes, and they've been given, more detailed examples about storytelling and narrative and effective design for non-expert audiences than what you've received here today. But I bet you can come up with some pretty good feedback about how to improve these slides. All right. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the first example is a series of 3 slides. And I'm going to show you all 3 of these slides. And I'd like for you to type into the chat how these slides could be improved. Okay. So I'm going to go through all 3 slides so you can see it here. And then I'd like you to type it in the chat as to how you think these slides could be improved. Because believe you me, they could be. So that's slide 1. Here's slide 2. And here's slide 3. Anybody want to suggest things? So let me go through these again. Slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. All right, let's see what people say. Fonts need to be bigger. Yeah, that could certainly help. Visuals, right? Visuals. Putting a left aligning things. It helps us in the West to read when everything is left aligned. Yeah, you visuals or graphics. Yeah, not using the lower right corner. That's definitely a possibility. What's the topic? Exactly. Exactly, Courtney. So the student was trying to be kind of clever and say, like, by flipping on some level the order of content. So we thought, okay, I could like do the first thing and then the thing that's actually about, I'll put it below. Well, that doesn't help us process information because we read in the West from top to bottom, left to right. So here on this first slide, he's talking about the obesity rate in the United States by 2035 will be 50% of the adult population. But he says 50% of the adult population obesity rate in the United States by 2035. Which one makes more sense to us? The first one, where you have that you need the context, you need the topic there first, right? He was just trying to be clever, right? Or, 1 in 8 people will be obese by 2035. That's 1 billion people worldwide. But we lack context or even a visual that tells us what's going on there, right? Yeah. So it's pretty, yeah, the information doesn't connect properly because he was more concerned with being clever than with being clear and following like how people actually visually process information. Yeah. So clear connectivity, larger font, making it, what's going on, and some visual to enhance it, right? Is there a visual he could have added there? There's something called the picture superiority effect. There's been research done on this. Richard Meyer writes about this, that people are more likely to remember text with images than text alone or images alone. So visuals are definitely a big thing. You're right. It's choppy, it's disjointed. Absolutely. All right. So here's the next example. The next example that I want to show you and see how you can fix here. Yeah. Percentages of what? 42.5% of what? Right? Of what? Where's the context there? All right. Next up. Here's the next example. So this example is comprised of 2 slides and shows a really common problem with showing data in our presentations to non-expert audience, right? There's slide 1 and there's slide 2. What are the problems with this? Slide one. Oops, sorry. Slide one, and now slide two. Yeah, the font size. Like, how are you supposed to read any of that? Right? How are you supposed to read? Too small. The colors are hard to see. Accessibility is a public health issue, right? Somebody with green or blue-based color blindness would not be able to read those labels. Not at all, right? It's just rough. Yeah, exactly. The ages aren't in order. That's a great catch. Look at the ages listed here. Also, the size of everything shifts from one slide to the next. Look how small the title gets. Look how small the title gets right there. The size changes. How are we supposed to make accurate comparisons between age groups when the bar length changes, when the size of the labels, the positions of the labels, the positions of the title changes, right? This is a common problem that I see in especially when we're showing graphs, tables, charts. It's like there's these little changes and the slide is always moving around. It is almost impossible for us to make accurate slide to slide comparisons when the fixed elements on a slide or the items that should be fixed move around like that. Right. Yeah. And why is it down at the bottom? What's with that space at the top? Yeah. Right. It's hard to compare the data when it's on different slides or moving across slides. Absolutely. All right. Third example. And this one is just one slide. How would you fix this? What's the problem with this slide? Because this is not uncommon at all, but doing something like this. Too much information. Absolutely. It's great they want to talk about measles, but what are they talking about? Are they talking about the symptoms or are they talking about how the virus works? Those should be two separate slides, but they crammed everything onto one here. And there isn't even like a layering thing where they fade in the actual image of the measles virus. They chose to put all of this on one slide. It's a handout. Exactly, Nicole. That's a handout. And what's the point? What is the point of this? What am I trying to talk about? What's my key message? Nothing is clear about it here at all. All right, last example. Last example. This is probably a slide you'd see in a lot of slide decks, right? It's not really bad, but what's wrong with it? And how could it be improved? How could it be improved? Too many words, right? Small bullet font. Absolutely. Not sure to where to look. Are we looking at the image? Or are we looking at the text, right? Image is pretty dark, may not be easy to see, especially if you're in an environment where the screen's really bright, there's a lot of bright exterior light. You might not be actually be able to see that image. Remove the social media buttons. Why are they there? What's the key thing there, right? Why wasn't this? I have a whole question for you. Why were there bullet points at all? Why wasn't it just an image of Maya telling a story about Maya and the fact that she spends many nights scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, right? Because it's a part of her nightly routine, right? Yeah, the image is not a particularly great reinforcement of the material. You could have that image on there and tell that story, and it would probably be more effective that way. It doesn't really reinforce there at all. Yeah, and you can barely see that she's holding a phone in that. Very much so. So these are just some examples. This is great. And it's good to put this stuff into practice, right? Just think about, because these are common mistakes that we see in presentations that we give, that I've seen other people give. Definitely this is not an uncommon thing in any way, shape, or form. And I don't mean to like say that my students are bad, but these are common mistakes. We want to train ourselves to find them so we can get over it, so we can not make those same mistakes ourselves. All right. At this point, you may be thinking, well, this is great. This is great and all. And I get it, like the composition thing, that's kind of easy to do. That's visual stuff that's kind of easy to follow. But what about character and conflict and stories? How do I put that into practice? How do I actually put that into practice? What's an easy way for me to do it? And you practice that a little bit with that exercise we did, that you chose one of the techniques and thinking about how you might apply it to a presentation. But is there more a holistic way to think about storytelling from a broader perspective? Absolutely. And you can do that through narrative frameworks. So narrative frameworks are common ways in which we tell stories. And there's hundreds of them, thousands of them out there. Probably one of the most famous is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, right? That was the basis for the narrative organization of the Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, and many other books and many other movies. And it came from traditions all around the globe. It is known as the monomyth, right? The core story that's shared in many, but not all cultures around the world. Hero's Journey is a great narrative framework, but I want to talk about one that I think is a little more close to home and a little easier and more applicable to the health sciences and substance misuse prevention. And that is the Pixar storytelling framework. Pixar storytelling framework is very powerful. It sort of infuses and is the framework on which all the Pixar movies have been made. Real quick question. What's your favorite Pixar movie? Go. Don't think about it. Just go. What's your favorite Pixar movie? Put it in the chat. I want to see that. The first two are Cars. Wow. Different generation, maybe. I don't know. Up, absolutely. Monsters Inc. Monsters Inc. Way up there. Up, Cars, Toy Story. Which Toy Story? That's the real question one. Bugs Life, The Incredibles. Okay, so Gwen, you're a person after my own heart. The Incredibles, the first one, is my favorite of all the Pixar films. It's hard to rank them. Soul's a great story. Up is a good. Inside Out. Joy, again, that's my number two. It's like those Incredibles, Inside Out, Finding Nemo, Toy Story 3, and beyond that, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to rank them. There's so many good stories. There are so many good stories. Monsters Inc. included, absolutely. The Jesse scene in Toy Story 2, yeah, completely. No, the in Toy Story 3 where the kids are there, the toys are on the conveyor belt to the incinerator. Sorry, spoiler alert. And then at the end when Andy, oh my God, great storytelling, really powerful. So the Pixar storytelling framework is based on this idea of story spine, that in every story, in movies and TV shows, books, there's a core sort of story that works. What is the backbone of your story? What are the things, the core events on which everything else is hung? And the Pixar storytelling framework is not something that Pixar themselves published at all. They did not. It's something that Emma Coates, who was their lead storyboard artist from the time Pixar was founded till about 2014. She wrote about this on her blog, and this became known as the Pixar storytelling framework. And Emma Coates knows what she's talking about. She, again, as I mentioned, was the key storyboard artist or lead storyboard artist on the original Toy Story. So storyboarding is sort of like visualizing what the movie is going to look like before a scene is shot, or in this case, any frames are rendered by the computer because it's all computer-generated graphics. Emma Coates was the person who wrote and directed the first 10 minutes of the movie Up. And if you've ever seen that movie, you know the sequence that I'm talking about. It's 10 minutes of almost mostly silent storytelling that tells the story of Carl and Ellie and how they met, how they fell in love, and what happened to them as they got older. It is considered by many, many, many filmmakers to be one of the great storytelling achievements of the entire sort of canon of global canon of film. It's incredibly powerful, incredibly beautiful. Really, she knows what she's doing. So the Pixar storytelling framework goes like this. Once upon a time, and every day, until one day, and because of this, and because of that, until finally. That is the core story of all of Pixar's movies. All of them. So you can look at Toy Story, you can look at Cars, or you can look at Up, or you can look at Coco, or you can look at any number of movies, and you can follow this framework, right? And you can see that it includes elements of character, conflict, pacing, reflection, all the narrative techniques that make for great stories. So let me give you a little more context to this. So Once Upon a Time is the context of the world, where we are, where we live, right? Who lives there, who's there. Every day they establish some kind of everyday routine about how life in that world works. Until one day there's an incident that launches the story. And because of that incident, the main character or characters go on a journey. And during that journey, they learn something about themselves or their obstacles that they need to be overcome. And they change their path, they change their tactics until finally there's a resolution to that story, right? So let me go through the Pixar storytelling framework. And again, you're going to get a copy of the slides so you can follow along with this by looking at one of my favorite Pixar movies that I've seen many, many times with my kids, Finding Nemo. So once upon a time, there's a fish named Marlin who was protective of his son Nemo. And every day, Marlin warned Nemo that the world was full of danger until one day, Nemo ignored his dad and swam out into the sea and touched the butt. And because of this, he was captured by a diver and ended up in a fish tank. And because of that, Marlin swam across the ocean to rescue Nemo until finally Marlin found Nemo and learned that love depends on trust. That's the Pixar storytelling framework. And you can apply this to any of their movies and you'll see how it works. It works really well and is also part and parcel of their enormous success over the years. So, What does this have to do with the health sciences, right? What does Finding Nemo have to do with the health sciences? Well, the great thing about storytelling frameworks is they can be applied to a lot of different situations, especially when you have to get up and talk to people, present an idea, seek funding, whatever it is. This is a nice sort of like overarching framework. So things like composition or reflection or conflict, a lot of times those are specific moments in your presentation. Storytelling frameworks help you shape your entire presentation. So let me give you an example of how this applies to the health sciences. So once upon a time is your problem, right? There's a problem that's out there. And every day there are kind of solutions that are there and they don't necessarily work, or there's problems with them, or they work for part of the problem, but not the whole issue. Until one day there is or was, right? Because we can look at this historically. You can talk about history with this as well. Penicillin, right? Finding penicillin, the discovery of penicillin, right? That could be your story that you're telling and you're applying it in the Pixar storytelling framework. So until one day there's an action, there's a new solution, there's an event that occurs, new funding, new opportunities. And because of this, things start changing or there's challenges. And because of the what started changing things, there was outcomes, things starting to improve until finally you get to either the current situation where we're still working on the process, or there was some kind of desired outcome. In the case of penicillin, diseases and bacterial infections that would have killed us are now treatable, right? So there's a current desired outcome there. So this is how you would apply on a very high level the Pixar storytelling framework to the health sciences. So let me give you a more concrete example. And I'm going to talk about something that is very near and dear to me, and that's antibiotic resistance. So once upon a time, you get an antibiotic every time you go to the doctor. Pharmaceutical companies are pushing them. The doctor's like, oh, that rash, that scrape, that whatever, let's give you an antibiotic just to make sure nothing is going to infect you there, right? And every day, antimicrobial bacteria are on the rise. And here's the data to prove it, because using storytelling frameworks does not mean you don't use graphs, tables, charts, and data. You absolutely can. And every day is a great place to say, here's data to prove or talk about the issue at hand. Until one day, my team, this team, someone's team, came up with a strategy for reducing antibiotic overprescription and also sparking new research. Because antibiotic research, new antibiotics, researching new antibiotics isn't particularly popular because it's not very profitable. So we came up with a new strategy for that as well. And because of this dual prong strategy, we're getting now a reduction in antibiotic resistant microbes, as well as an increase in funding for new antibiotic research so that companies don't have to outlay the money when they might not get a big return. And because of that, we're going to have better health outcomes for people and better incentives for private research because public-private partnerships really do work until finally we can have generations of new antibiotics and we don't have to live in fear of paper cuts giving us an infection that will kill us. So that's the Pixar storytelling framework at work in a health sciences framework. Again, it's applicable across like longer presentations, shorter presentations. You can use it in all sorts of environments there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do an exercise, and you are very briefly, very briefly, going to apply the Pixar storytelling framework to your own work. Okay. So what we're going to do is you're going to think about the work that you do in substance misuse prevention, a project, an intervention, a grant proposal that you've already kind of gone through, has been successful, maybe rejected, or something you're working on, something new. And I'd like you to focus on, since we don't have a lot of time here, right? And we're not going to do this for an hour because really we've got less than a half hour left in the webinar and there's more material I want to get to, more resources I want to share with you. So what I'd like you to do is just focus on the first two steps. Once upon a time and every day. So think about the work that you're doing and how would you frame it? Or see how far you can get, right? Once upon a time and every day until one day. As far as you can get in the next 2 minutes. I know that's not a lot of time. I know it's not a lot of time, but I have more things I want to share with you and answer more of your questions that are coming in the Q&A. So think about this. Let's take 2 minutes. I'll sit here quietly. So remember, think about a project that you're working on, an intervention, a proposal, something you've already done before, if it's not something that you're currently working on or something you're thinking about doing. Because this can help you think about how you might pitch this in a narrative format to a funding organization, how you might sell this to your superiors, right? The Pixar storytelling framework can help in that. So just try to focus on those first three steps, once upon a time and every day until one day. So I'm going to be quiet now for 2 minutes and we'll come back and we'll see what your examples are. All right, so I can see some answers, some responses already coming in. I want to try and go through some of these, see what I can do. So Kylie, the first to respond, said, sort of once upon a time, there's too many kids are engaging in risky behaviors, and every day more and more are becoming dependent on substances. That's a great start, right? Because you're including conflict. There's a lot of conflict there, right? As a parent, I would be unhappy to hear that. It's a natural born conflict built in there, right? And it positions the problem in the foreground, which is what conflict should do. And then you can build off of that there. Absolutely. Let's see. Meredith says, once upon a time, youth smoking rates were almost non-existent. And every day since, the tobacco companies contemplated how to get new customers until one day, two scientists from Juul dot dot dot. This is great. You're setting up conflict. You're setting up villains. You are setting yourself up for a really engaging story, right? A framework that can like guide the information on the history of Juul and the legal battles and how because of cotton candy flavored vapes, we've seen increased uptake and rates of nicotine and these kind of tools because of that. Yeah, absolutely. A team one. This is nice. All right. So Pam says, once upon a time, our prevention providers had success stories. Unfortunately, the process by which we told these stories was so long that we couldn't produce timely stories until one day our team came up with an idea to do a podcast to showcase these success stories. I love that, Pam, because it's not just about our external work where we can use these storytelling frameworks. It is also absolutely about our internal work to our peers, to our supervisors, to the people that we work with every single day. Absolutely. And Katie asked a question in the Q&A that I think is really appropriate that I'd like to answer now. Katie asked, with these frameworks, would it be possible to use these in a 5-minute presentation or elevator pitches, or is this more ideal for longer presentations? It works for both. So in one of my classes, I have students give a 4-minute lightning talk that uses the Pixar storytelling framework. Another class that I teach, I have students do an elevator pitch that uses kind of a variation of this because it's 90 seconds. It's hard to do all of this in 90 seconds, but you can if you try. It's a framework that works in pretty much every situation. So yeah, you can use it for shorter presentations. You can use it for longer presentations. Absolutely. So let's see. Brooke says, once upon a time, prescription drug overdoses are 1 in 5 adults in our community. Everyday medications are being taken from family members' medicine cabinets until one day our coalition began giving out medication lock boxes. And because of this, medications are stored securely and there is less access without a prescription. Now overdoses are down 30%. That is a great, super simple, super condensed version of the Pixar storytelling framework. Thank you, Brooke. It shows you've set up the story, you created conflict, you added characters, family members having their medication stolen. That's super important too. And you showed the outcome until one day, and then finally there was this outcome from it. You told the entire story in what is that, 4 sentences, 3 sentences there. That's awesome. But you can see, I think, how that structures or can structure your presentation as well. So yeah, depression, the depression example, Diana, is a really good one as well. So yeah, I wish I could go over all of these, and thank you so much for sharing these. And I would encourage each of you to look at what your peers have written because they're really good examples. And I think you can see how powerful the Pixar storytelling framework can be. In terms of being flexible and structuring things around character, conflict, pacing, and well, less composition, but at least and reflection, right? It has all of those things in there. So I really try to try to think about how you might use this. Try to apply it to your next presentation, whether it's a 5-minute or a 25-minute one. And I think you'll find that this is really you really will really help you in this regard in terms of structuring and organizing your presentations there. I wish I had more time. Time is always of the essence, but I do want to get to a few more things before we wrap up today. And again, thank you. Thank you for contributing. If you don't contribute, it makes my job a lot harder, and you're all awesome. This is one of the reasons why I love giving these talks to the GLPTTC because the audiences are always super engaged, super, super happy. Thank you. So I've given you a lot of information, and I'll tell you that none of this really works, whether you're choosing to follow my guidance or not. You will not have an effective presentation if you don't rehearse. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. None of this works without preparation and rehearsal. I asked the question, what makes for a good presentation? I'll tell you, the one thing that makes for a good presentation is rehearsal. You want to differentiate between good presenters and mediocre presenters? It's rehearsal. It's not about how funny you are. It's not about how compelling your content is, although both of those things certainly help. It's about rehearsal and preparation. Because when you rehearse, you catch those kind of like crazy, malformed, misshapen things that come out of your mouth that if you don't prepare for them, you're like, oh my God, why did I say that? Or that was the wrong information. Or I'm leading people down the wrong path here today, right? Also, more importantly, you'll know if your content fits your time. Please don't be that presenter who has 137 slides for a 30-minute presentation and you're tearing through them as fast as you can because you only have 5 minutes left. Nobody remembers any of that. But if you rehearse and practice, you'll know whether or not your content fits your time and you can figure out what to cut, right? I mean, we've all been there with those people who are like, yeah, I've got 17 slides and you can just read the slide deck. That is so rude, disrespectful to your audience. Figure it out. Rehearsal will help you know if your content fits your time because great presenters who are great storytellers did not get that way without practicing each and every story, each and every presentation. You can dump a bunch of information onto slides at the last minute. PowerPoint absolutely allows you to do that, right? It's not going to make for a good presentation. It's not going to make for a memorable presentation, not just in terms of like your emotional experience, but the things you remember and take away from it. And you can't just also think it in your head. Plenty of people are like, oh, I'll just practice in my head. No, get up on your feet, talk it out. Rehearsal breeds confidence. People are terrified of having to get up in front of a group of people and present, whether it's in person or on Zoom. They're terrified. That doesn't go away. I'm sorry, it doesn't. But rehearsal breeds confidence. So no matter what questions come up, no matter what bad things go happen, your internet goes out, your power goes out, your slides crash, you will have confidence about what you're supposed to do next because you've rehearsed. Rehearsal is the key to a good presentation. All right. So in our last couple minutes before we get to some open Q&A, I want to leave you some resources. If you want to know like books, if you're a book-oriented person like I am with lots of visual examples and guidance on how to be a better presenter, I want to give you 3 books. And they're short, they're highly visual, so it's not a lot of reading. Number 1, Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. This is a book that I say everybody should have to read. All the faculty at Bloomberg School of Public Health. Before anybody gets up in front of any group of people, you got to read this book. Because it's not only about how to create visually beautiful presentations, aesthetically pleasing presentations, it's about connecting with your audience in meaningful ways. Understanding your audience, connecting with their audience. Gar Reynolds is the guy who taught Steve Jobs, the former CEO of Apple, how to present. And Steve Jobs is probably one of the most famous presenters in modern history, right up there with MLK. Very different goals, although both of them changed the world in their own ways. But as a presenter, as a speaker, he was incredible. He created something called the reality distortion field that could like pretty much get you to buy anything because he was such a meticulous, detailed, and careful presenter. This book is awesome. Lots of great visuals. Highly recommend it. Next up is Demystifying Public Speaking by Lara Hogan. Lara Hogan used to be the CTO, Chief Technical Officer at Etsy, the website Etsy, the I make it, you buy it online marketplace. Laura Hogan's book, Demystifying Public Speaking, talks specifically about how to enter the STEM space, science, technology, education, math space for public speaking as a presenter, how to write good conference proposals. How to choose topics that are interesting to people. But she also writes about what it means specifically to be a woman in the sciences and what it means to present, how you deal with mansplainers, with people who don't really ask questions, but are just sort of like telling you wrong, telling you that you're wrong somehow, correcting you through their questions. How to deal with basic mundane things like you go to a conference and the technician needs to put a lavalier mic on you, needs to, run it through your blouse or your shirt. Like, how do you deal with those situations? It's a great book. It's available for free. I highly recommend it. And if you're a kind of like a research publication kind of person, I highly recommend Jonathan Schwabish's Better Presentations. This is a book that has all the research on like why certain colors are better than others, why certain font sizes, bigger font sizes better than others, how to lay out your graphs, tables, charts. It's a textbook I use when I teach my students. It has beautiful visuals. And it also has all the references that you would ever need in terms of saying, this is the evidence, these are the studies that really back like most of the things I'm talking about here today, and how to create better presentations in general. It's a great, great book. I highly recommend it. From a design perspective, being better at design is also important. I am not a designer, couldn't design to save my life, but I try to create visually, aesthetically pleasing in slide decks because people remember those. You want to stand out at a conference, don't use the built-in PowerPoint templates. I can't tell you the number of times I presented and people are like, where did you get that slide deck? Like, where'd you get that design? Is that in PowerPoint? No, it's not in PowerPoint. What I do and what I recommend you do is spend $5 $10 and get a professional template for PowerPoint, for Keynote, for Google presentations. Envato.com is a website that sells thousands of these, thousands and thousands. Most of them are between $5 and $20. They are awesome and excellent resources. So like this template I use today is not something that I designed, but I love it. I love the bright colors. It works for me. It's still accessible, and it's become kind of part of my brand there. And you will stand out, and you won't have to worry about, oh, is the slide going to look pretty? Because these designers help you make things look pretty. If you follow their templates, if you follow the guides and those, your stuff's going to look good. And oops, my camera's off. Sorry, Chris. I didn't realize I turned my camera off. That was my bad. You are going to stand out from your peers and not have to worry about all those design decisions there. And when it comes to images, and you know that I love to use images, you can see all these images that I've used in my presentation today. I highly recommend unsplash.com. So unsplash.com, not only do they provide the images copyright free, or I should say under a Creative Commons license, which is kind of like being copyright free, although there's some exceptions to that. It's a great website. They have millions of images. You can search on them. And for me, very importantly, they have diversity in their representation of people. True diversity across, ethnicities, across races, people who have physical impairments, those that don't, ages. It's a great website. You can also use Google Images, but no matter what sort of, website that you use, just make sure that the image is big. You want to use images that are greater than 1,000 pixels in at least one dimension, because otherwise what you wind up getting are these really small images that get stretched and distorted, and they look all kind of like blurry and bumpy because you've stretched them out. They just look unprofessional. Seriously. Blurry, distorted, stretched images look unprofessional. They're not your best representation of yourself. Please don't use them. And you can use that in Google. Unsplash automatically has high resolution images. On Google Images, if you look in the dot, 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 those like they call them hamburger menus, it's a dot, dot, dot menu at the top. Under there, one of the options is image size. Try to do that. Yeah, try to use those there. Yeah, and paying creators and designers is much better than telling AI to make your slide deck for you. I get asked all the time because I also teach about generative AI at Johns Hopkins from like a, how do I use it in my everyday public health work. Generative AI slide creators are generally terrible. Generally terrible. You'll get too much text, too much reading. They are not great. The one tool that I've explored that I think has real promise is Claude for PowerPoint. It understands things like slide masters. It's still gonna create a too text-heavy, dense presentation, but it is better than most AI slide generators. Even the one built into PowerPoint, Copilot, if anybody uses Microsoft Copilot, those presentations are just bad that it comes up with. You can do better. You absolutely can do better. Don't use AI generators on that front. So, my hope here is today that you cannot just, take techniques to create more compelling experiences when you present to your partners and your peers, but that you're also able to tell stories. Short stories, longer form stories, using the Pixar storytelling framework, or just using the individual techniques that you can go out there and present a compelling story and present it in a compelling way, because that's what will engage your audience and that's what will help them remember much, much longer after the end of your presentation than not trying to focus on storytelling in the first place. So that's it for me. Thank you all. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn things over to Q&A. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A pod. I know Chris has a couple of things, so I think we can Q&A can go for about 5 minutes here, but if you do have questions, please feel free to ask me now in the next 5 minutes. I love talking about presenting. This is what I teach. It's what I do. It's great. So there was a question in the QA pod before I get to your question, Peggy. Do I recommend embedding videos into presentations? What about having videos? Nothing wrong with using videos in your presentations at all, as long as it serves a purpose and a point. It's a storytelling technique. I've seen videos where it's like this moving background that loops over and over again. That's just going to serve to distract your audience. That does not tell a story. That does not really help you at all. People put videos or animated images a lot of times in their presentations because they want to spice things up. They don't want their slides to be boring. Those animated images, animated backgrounds are distractors. So we as humans evolved to have excellent peripheral vision. This allowed us to avoid the saber-toothed tiger crawling through the tall grass, because in our peripheral vision, we're like, ooh, something's over there. So this is the same thing with laser pointers that as even if you have great balance and skill, you cannot hold a laser pointer still. It's going to be doing this, right? It's going to do this while you're talking. As much as you want to hold it still, it's going to bounce around. And our brains are constantly like, oh, look over there, look over there, look over there, look over there. It is a distractor that impedes our ability to process information and then retain that information over time because we are having to multitask, and humans are not good multitaskers, especially when it comes to processing information. But if you're using a video to illustrate an example, do it. A picture is worth 1,000 words. A video is worth, 100,000 words in many cases. Just make sure it has a point and that it doesn't go on for too long. Nobody wants to sit and watch like a 5-minute video. They're coming to hear you talk, to engage with you as a presenter. So be really careful about having long form videos unless they are really engaging and really serve your point. Try to keep a video to a snippet, like, under a minute where possible. That will help keep your audience engaged and probably get your point across quite quickly. Yeah. So Peggy wants to know, what to do about the necessity of using the organization's branding slide deck requirements if they're bland and really boring? Yes, absolutely. So this is a challenge I have. I speak at conferences and they're like, you must use our template. And I say, well, your template doesn't allow me to tell the story effectively. What I'll be happy to do is put your branding on my opening slide, like my when people are coming into the conference room kind of slide. I'll use it. Maybe if we take a break, I'll use it again at the end. I'll use your request for evaluation slide with QR codes, things like that. Use your own leverage and say your template does not allow me to tell the story in a way that I find works best for your audience. And that usually gets people to be like, okay, I can see that. I can see that. As long as you are acknowledging in some way that you are part of this conference, you are doing something for them. And if it comes down to it, I've also had times where folks are like, nope, you got to use our slide template whether you want to or not. So I do that and I follow my own principles around simplicity, clarifying my message by, or simplifying the presentation. If they want me to use this, if they have like a one-liner, I use that one-liner over and over and over again. If there are really distracting logos, a real challenge that I see is that you'll have organizations that'll put 3 or 4 logos at the top or bottom of each of one of their slides. And that row of logos will take up like a quarter of the space you have on that slide. I just put a white box overlay over it, a 50% or an 80% transparent white box overlay. So their logos are still there. I'm still using their template, but it's not distracting my audience visually because each of those logos is a visual distraction. Every time a slide comes up, we have to learn how to process that slide. And even though those logos are on every single slide, it is a visual distraction from the key points you're trying to make. So put that like 70%, 80% transparent white box over it. You're not getting rid of their logos. They're still visible, but they're not distracting from your key messaging. Yeah, yeah, that's what I try to do. Um, Oh, so Autumn wants to know, ask in the Q&A, why did I choose this particular Zoom background rather than just blurring my background? Because she was thinking about it the entire presentation. So the reason why I use this background is really kind of twofold. Number one, it's not your typical Zoom background. This is a still from the movie Spirited Away. It's a pretty famous Japanese film, and the filmmaker is very well known. He's a beautiful, incredible storyteller. He writes great stories that don't pander to children, but really also speak to adults. And this is a great story. Spirited Away is a great story about that transition from being a young child into being sort of a young adult, about the moment you realize you have responsibility in your life, whether or not you like it, and what that means to an 8-year-old or 9-year-old kid. It is beautiful and lovingly animated with just incredible animation. And this is a background that I thought was beautiful, and it speaks to me. I've watched that movie with my kid many times. But by keeping this background, this partly becomes part of my brand. I don't like the whole like I have a personal brand kind of conversation, but I put this in all my meetings. And when people see me speak, they see this background, they associate it with me. And it's humane and kind of lovely in its own way, and a lot more engaging and says something a little bit about me, much more so than just my blurred background. I would never want to show my real background. My room's uninteresting. But that's the reason that I do it. It speaks a little bit about who I am as a person. I love animated films, as you can tell from Pixar's storytelling framework. And I think it's also visually different enough that it's not going to really distract, but helps to make me stand out as a presenter as well. Yeah, Miyazaki is absolutely unbeaten in storytelling. Absolutely. Um, But yeah, this you could feel that it's too busy and bright. But if I'm doing my job right, you're focusing more on my content and less on me. So everybody should be, figure out what works best for you. Definitely figure out what works best for you. All right, I'm at 156, and I know Chris has a couple of housekeeping things that she needs to get to. I will just again say thank you, thank you, thank you. This was a great session. You were a great audience, and I really appreciate your time today. So turning it back over to Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian. I know, I've heard you speak on this topic several times now, and I still write, pages of notes because each time I hear things that I'm like, oh yeah, he said that, and oh yeah, I forgot about that. So it's like my booster session. So thank you so much for all the incredible information that you've
My
shared.
pleasure.
I do have a few things I want to make sure folks know are coming up that you can access from the Great Lakes PTTC. If you'd like to join me, I'm going to deliver a webinar on March 10th next week on Logic Models Unlocked. So if you want to learn about logic models, join me then. If you supervise folks in the prevention field, I encourage you to attend the training on March 17th and 18th that Nicole Augustine will be delivering for us. This is a interactive training that you will need to be on camera and microphone because there will be breakout sessions during it. On March 24th, this is a training that's focused on the intermediate and advanced level folks. It's going to be on letting go of what doesn't work. So we know what does and doesn't work through research. How do we move our communities away from those strategies that don't work and towards more effective prevention? On the 26th, we're going to talk about making the case for prevention, crafting effective messages that build support. In April, we have our Sustainability Planning Intensive Training course. We only have a couple more slots left for that. So if you're interested in attending that, I encourage you to apply really soon. Priority is given to Region 5 folks because we have a limited number of slots for that training. Similarly, in May, we have our virtual SAPs. This is also priorities given to Region 5 folks. Apply right away if you are interested in attending that. And we get Brian back in June. Yay! Telling Stories with Data, a crash course in data visualization for non-expert audiences. Brian, can I put you on the spot real quickly if you want to share a couple of thoughts about what's going to be covered in that June training?
Sure. So, good data visualizations are like good presentations. They are about storytelling. And we can apply storytelling techniques, not exactly the Pixar storytelling framework, but some storytelling techniques to how we organize our data and how we choose to present it to non-expert audiences. And there are some data visualization types that work better for non-expert audiences than others. And that's really what the seminar is about, is helping you choose the right kind of data visualization and tell stories with your data in that data visualization. I enjoy teaching it. It's a lot of fun. Good exercises too.
Great. Can't wait for it. All right, and just a reminder that if you are a social media type of person, if you would like to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, this is the way we get information to you on a daily basis. So as things can come up, we can get it out to you right away. Love for you to follow us on either or both of those. A reminder that once we close out of here, you will be redirected to our GIPR evaluation form. If you could take a couple minutes to let us know, it's invaluable to get your feedback about what worked and what, if we had done differently, could have made it even better. I read every single comment that you put in there, so please know that it doesn't go into a black hole, and we really appreciate your help with that. And with that, any last thoughts, Rebecca or Brian, before we log off?
Nope, just thank you again to everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's in the recording and everything. I'll send links in that follow-up email so folks can access all the resources. And Brian, you're going to send me a one-pager, yes?
Absolutely. It might not be today, but I
Yeah.
will get to that to you as soon as in the next couple days. I promise to get that to you. Traveling all day tomorrow, it's going to be crazy. So I'll do it as soon as I can.
Great. And certificates will be emailed to folks within about 2 weeks. Is that correct, Rebecca?
Yes.
All right, if you attended the full training. All right, well, thank you all for your active involvement. I really appreciate you all being here. And once again, a huge thank you to Brian, and also a huge thank you to Rebecca, who does all the work and pulling this together, putting it on, and then all the follow-up. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.